Hello and welcome to a episode of Writing Thoughts, because I'm really just going to be using this video this week to talk about my opinions on the first and second book in the Metro series by Dmitry Glukhovsky. And this is something that is pretty easy for me to talk about because the contrast between these two books it's big. And my opinion is one among many that believe that the first book succeeds where the second one fails. And they're very different both in the way that they structure their story, but also the presentation of their characters. So we're going to get into that. But first, let me talk about the 4th of July. To celebrate this year's 4th of July, I'm having a huge sale, both on my books and on my courses page. Usually the entire library of my writing courses is $49.99, but for this 4th of July sale, it's $17.76. As for my books, they are also available at a huge discount, now at 99 cents each, except the free ones, which will remain free. You can check out my course bundle, or the free course I have available, as well as my books, all in the description below. So with that short ad over, let's talk about these two books. First of all, I should say that I am going to be biased, and this is only my opinion. There's going to be those out there who happily say that the second book is better than the first, and that's alright. For some people, they want to see a certain kind of story, and the second one provided it where the first one didn't. However, I'm going to say they're wrong and share my own opinions. So let me share a little bit of what I know about the first and second book, and there's going to be spoilers before we get into the comparisons. The first book, Metro 2033, sets the stage. It explains a lot about how the world developed and why it is in such a post-apocalyptic state. For those of you that don't know, Metro 2033 is set in a post-apocalyptic Russian future, where the world was pretty much destroyed through nuclear warfare. As a result, those who wanted to survive took up underground in the underground metro stations. Every day is a battle. Everybody is trying to scrape up enough food or money to get food. Not to mention there's an array of mutant creatures out there that will happily take them all out. The first book follows Artyom. Artyom's home station in the metro is being threatened by the Dark Ones, a strange mutated race that poses a tremendous threat. So he is requested by Hunter to travel to Central Station, known as Polis, to seek help. During his journey, he encounters various factions, Neo-Nazi Reich, the Communist Red Line, and the Hansa. Along the way, he also meets several individuals who either assist him or try to take him out. After all of these events, Artyom does reach the Polis station and convinces the authorities to send military assistance. Eventually, they do launch an attack against the Dark Ones. However, Artyom discovers that the Dark Ones were not as malevolent as they seemed. It's a brilliant journey because it follows so many surreal events, close calls and tense moments, as well as interesting and realistic characters that really captivate the reader. And for me, I found it an almost surreal experience because there were so many moments where it was suddenly quiet and thoughtful, and in those moments it seemed almost insane to think that so many dangerous and unexplainable things were happening all around them. So to have something so mundane and normal, or something so out of place happen, just created this huge contrast between events. But that's something I can appreciate in writing, because at the same time I didn't feel it was so unrealistic that it was impossible to have happened in the setting. Now let's talk about Metro 2034. A direct sequel to 2033, it follows Hunter, the same Hunter who warned Artyom about the Dark Ones, an old man named Homer, and Sasha, a young girl that they meet along the way on their mission to discover the source of a strange virus plaguing another station, and hopefully find a cure or put the inhabitants of said station down. The trio's journey takes them through dangerous territories and encounters with various metro factions, just like Artyom's. They face physical and moral challenges, nothing new there, and the characters' backgrounds and motivations are explored a bit more in depth, as these are characters, well, specifically Hunter, that we already know. The story concludes with them being triumphant in a way, The virus outbreak is contained by flooding said station. As a result, though, Sasha is lost, leaving Homer and Hunter alive. The novel emphasizes this in the end as a bleak, anticlimactic ending. It was an ending that was so sudden and shocking that it left quite an empty feeling in a lot of readers' stomachs. And that's nothing new when it comes to science fiction. Science fiction often has these kinds of endings to emphasize the fact that, dark futures tend to have dark endings themselves. There's often very little hope in such dire circumstances, and especially in post-apocalyptic worlds. You never know if things are going to be rebuilt, or if a new way of life has to develop. One where happy endings are just simply continuing, even though you are left with a lot less than what you started with. The second book explores Hunter's character a bit more. Although he was introduced as a very competent soldier in the start of the first book, he disappears and then reappears in the second book. So for the first book, Hunter is presented as this very capable character who disappears, possibly taken out by the Dark Ones, so that really adds a little bit of fear to Artyom's journey, as he now needs to go through the metro stations to reach Polos. The same thing that Hunter was supposed to do, and Artyom is surely not as capable as him. But in the second book, we see that Hunter has survived. Although scarred and full of PTSD, he seems to come off as an almost menacing and supernatural individual, having keen senses that make him seem like a monster from the metros instead of a normal human being. At least that's what Homer believes in the second book. So those are the two books with as little spoilers as I can give away, although I did give away some crucial ones. However, I want to now talk about the characters themselves, starting first with Metro 2033. For Metro 2033, it follows Artyom purely, as in, we follow him through all the events that he encounters, and very little when it comes to the other characters. Sure, they may drop in and out, but most of the time we're stuck with Artyom and his thoughts. As a result, 2033 feels like a lot more personal of a journey, as we do encounter some interesting characters and learn a bit more about them, but mainly we're learning about Artyom as he learns a bit more about the metro itself, and, the place of humans in this world. This is a character who isn't experienced with what he encounters, and what he encounters is often terrifying. There is also this supernatural sense of destiny when it comes to Artyom, so everything he encounters feels like he's just riding the waves of fate. However, this is different when it comes to 2034. When it comes to 2034, we follow Homer's perspective most of the time, as this is the book that he has written about the situations that he was involved in. This is his retelling. So, as we follow his perspective, we learn a bit more about him, more than anything else, but also his own interpretations of Hunter and Sasha. And I should say that this becomes an important point when it comes to 2035, because 2035 kind of retcons Homer's perspective on the events of 2034, that some events that he has talked about simply didn't happen. It was his retelling of these events, and he's an unreliable narrator. And that brings me neatly to why 2033 does better than 2034. 2033 feels like a more cohesive and enjoyable story because we follow Artyom closely, because we follow the events that he goes through closely, and it feels like a surreal standalone story. It doesn't feel like it's necessary for there to even be a series. That's not to say that he isn't an enjoyable character to read. It would be okay to read him in a series of books, but the first one was pretty conclusive in the way it ended. At least as conclusive as a science fiction can end. Because as I said, it's often ambiguous, anticlimactic, and unsatisfying. But 2034 tries to do something different, with broken dialogue systems, the evidence of an unreliable narrator. But also it is a story that doesn't add anything to the world space that is enjoyable. Homer doesn't present himself as an interesting character to follow. As for Hunter, he is an interesting character that we wanted to learn more about, but this book kind of makes him seem a bit more two-dimensional, less interesting. And it's to be understood that he's a stoic individual, that he's encountered many dark events that gave him a certain level of PTSD that leaves him jumpy and dangerous. But at the same time, it made the character a little too flat. Then there's the plot itself. The plot of the first book feels like it's present always. There's a sense of trying to reach Polis that is conveyed in the story, that dire circumstance of his station being put in danger, and every day wasted is another day that his people suffer. So reaching Polis is very important, and that much is conveyed throughout the book. However, when it comes to the plot in 2034, it doesn't feel as dire or as important. It feels like a plot that was more of an afterthought most of the time. The events of the story are captivating in its own way, but the overall plot isn't. The whole idea of reaching a station that you never really see, nor meet many of the characters that are talked about, it comes off as empty. And that's what kind of encapsulates 2034 as a whole. It feels like it's lacking something. At least that's something that the first one had. And maybe that's something that the developers of the video games picked up upon, because after the first video game, they changed the story completely and wanted to create their own narrative with Artyom, sticking with him as the main character and his growth and journey over the years in the metro. But that's something else entirely that I won't be talking about. However, it should be said that the video game certainly attracted a lot of people to the books themselves. Not only because they are based on the books, but the books are also referenced within the games. There's a huge community behind Metro, and that's not to say it didn't have a big community already before the games were ever released. Maybe this is why 2035 tries to clarify the series as a whole. It's a return to form with Artyom as the lead protagonist. It's a story that's a lot more stable, as so far as I've heard, as I've yet to read it. But it also does retcon many of the events that happened in 2034. Simply because those are events that many people weren't happy with, or characters that they weren't happy with. But again, this is just subjective opinion on my part. There are certainly people out there who enjoy both books as a whole, and I still believe I am one of them. I just feel that the first one is better because it appealed to me more. But 2034 was enjoyable for its own reasons. It did have qualities that the first one didn't. As I said, the first book feels more like a surreal journey, and the second book feels like an action story. Or perhaps they presented themes that were just too complex for me to understand and they flew right over my head. Or perhaps it was lost in translation from Russian to English. Who knows? But by all means, share your own opinions in the comments below. If you believe I've made a mistake about my information or I clearly missed something, please let me know. And don't forget the 4th of July sale. If you're interested in any of my writing, it's all heavily discounted now for a short time. I should say that while I try to notify everybody about any major sales and events that I'm having on YouTube, if you want to get direct information from me, I highly recommend subscribing to my newsletter. There's a link to that in the description below, or you can subscribe on my website, whichever is easier for you. And I release a weekly email telling you all about what I've gotten up to, as well as some exclusive discounts and bonuses for anybody on my mailing list. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, be sure to check it out. There's links to everything in the description. But thank you for watching this video of me ranting about one of my favorite science fiction books, and I'll see you in the next episode of Writing Thoughts. Bye for now.